for more than half a century, deep inside the archives of the Lubyanka building in Moscow. There rested a dusty beige folder marked only with a short title, Case number 17, of special importance. No dates, no names, just a code. The folder was sealed in 2 layers of wax and placed inside a steel cabinet that only 3 people in the entire Soviet Union were allowed to open, even among the KGB's most classified operations, from counterintelligence networks in Europe to nuclear research sabotage abroad. Case number 17 was treated as something different. According to later testimonies of retired operatives, ordinary secret files had a smell, old paper, cigarette smoke, a trace of humidity. But case number 17, they said, felt cold. People joked about it quietly, but no one laughed for real. Officially, the United States never knew of this file's existence. Unofficially, they sensed something, because during the last decades of the Cold War, American satellites, interceptors, and field agents repeatedly recorded anomalies that didn't match any known Soviet project. But to understand what the KGB hid so carefully, we must go back to the winter of 1962, the year when the superpowers stood at the brink of nuclear war. While the world watched the Cuban Missile Crisis unfold, another incident occurred thousands of kilometers away, in the remote and frozen reaches of eastern Siberia. It began with a sudden flash registered by Soviet early warning stations. At first, command assumed it was a missile launch, possibly American, but the trajectory was wrong. The flash didn't rise, it fell, descending rapidly toward an unpopulated region near the Oymyakon Plateau, one of the coldest places on Earth. The KGB dispatched a small team of operatives disguised as geologists. Their official cover story claimed they were searching for rare mineral deposits. The real mission, however, was listed in internal documents as retrieval and containment. When the group arrived, they found a crater, but not the kind produced by a meteorite, nor by a weapon. In the center lay fragments of a metallic sphere the size of a human torso. The strange object emitted heat despite the 40 degrees temperature, and its smooth exterior bore no marks of welding, bolts, or seams. One of the operatives, Major Sidorov, later told his wife, shortly before mysteriously disappearing, that the object looked like it wasn't made by human hands. The discovery was immediately classified. The fragments were transported to a hidden research lab in Novosibirsk under the supervision of the newly formed Department of Special Scientific Studies, a shadow division of the KGB. From that moment, case number 17 became the agency's most protected secret. The Americans detected unusual transport flights in Siberia and unusual radio silence around several KGB sites. CIA analysts believed the Soviets were testing a new kind of reconnaissance, drone or missile guidance system. They couldn't have been more wrong, but they were right about one thing. Moscow had found something that could tilt the balance of power. Inside the folder marked Case Number 17 were telegrams, field reports, classified photographs, and a series of audio recordings. What these materials described would never appear in public Soviet documents, not during the USSR's existence, and not for 5 decades after its collapse. Because what the KGB found that winter was not simply debris. According to the earliest laboratory notes, the object contained a structure that behaved like a processor, but 1,000s of times more advanced than anything human engineers had built in 1962. It could respond to electrical impulses. More disturbingly, it could generate them on its own. The KGB understood immediately. If the United States learned even a fraction of what lay inside that crater, the strategic balance of the Cold War would be shattered. And so began 50 years of silence. Officially, the building did not appear on any Soviet maps. Even today, satellite images blur the area automatically, as if the black rectangle of land still carries a ghost of its former secrecy. It was known internally as Object S-32, a research compound outside Novosibirsk, surrounded by barbed wire, electric fencing, and a patrol system that operated day and night. The personnel assigned there didn't exist, their names removed from public records, their families compensated with fabricated stories about state missions abroad. Inside Object S-32, the fragments recovered in Siberia were transferred to a windowless underground hall. Only a handful of scientists were allowed to examine them, and all of them signed confidentiality documents, so strict that even mentioning the project outside the facility meant a sentence the same day. The leading scientist was Dr. Pavel Korneev, a brilliant physicist who had previously worked on classified radar systems. According to the testimonies he recorded years later, which were themselves never meant to be released, he realized from the first moment that the object was unlike any known technology. The smooth metallic sphere recovered in the crater behaved strangely. Its surface resisted cutting instruments, but when exposed to extremely low frequencies, it softened slightly, as if responding to sound rather than physical force. Kornev noted in his journal, "This is not a passive machine. It behaves as if it listens." But perhaps the most troubling discovery occurred when technicians hooked the object to standard measurement equipment. The sphere began emitting pulses, not random noise, but structured patterns, sequences that resembled encoded messages. At one point, the pulses matched the format of early radio communication, as if the device was attempting to communicate, using whatever protocols its new environment provided. The KGB leadership grew alarmed. They feared the object could send signals that foreign intelligence agencies might intercept, so they ordered the entire hall to be shielded with layers of lead and copper. Every piece of equipment brought inside had to be manually inspected and logged. No devices capable of radio transmission were permitted. For the next several years, Object S-32 worked in complete isolation. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the CIA was growing suspicious. They detected increased activity in Siberia, strange thermal signatures, construction of cooling towers, and regular visits by military aircraft. Analysts proposed the Soviets were developing a new type of nuclear battery, something capable of powering long-range unmanned aircraft. But a small group in the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology disagreed. They had intercepted faint, short-lived radio bursts from eastern Siberia weeks after the original 1962 incident. The signals were too weak to decode, but they didn't match Soviet protocols. Someone, or something, had transmitted them. And then suddenly the source went dark. Back in Object S-32, researchers made a breakthrough in 1967. Using a custom-built harmonic generator, they produced a sequence of frequencies that caused the metallic sphere to open. The top half separated silently from the bottom as if sliding on an invisible track. Inside was not machinery in the traditional sense, no wires, no circuits, no screws, but a crystalline structure that looked like a web of glass threads, each only a few microns thick. Kornev described it as a neural lattice, something closer to a biological brain than to an electronic device. And yet its patterns were stable, organized, purposeful. When electric current was applied, the lattice lit up with faint blue light. It wasn't random. The pulses moved in waves, like thought patterns. The scientists began calling it the mind, a term discouraged by KGB officials, who preferred the less poetic label. Unit 17A. Secret military reports from 1971 indicate the KGB believed this artifact could be the core of a guidance system for an unknown aircraft, possibly extraterrestrial, but they avoided writing the word extraterrestrial in any official document. Instead, they used the phrase foreign origin, non-hostile, non-human. For years, the scientists studied the lattice but could not determine its purpose. Then, in 1973, an event occurred that changed everything. While monitoring the lattice patterns, a young engineer named Leonid Svetov noticed something strange. The pulses inside Unit 17A were not only reacting to external frequencies, they were adapting, changing, reinforcing certain signals and ignoring others, as if learning. It wasn't just listening anymore, it was responding. When Kornev realized what was happening, he wrote a single sentence in his confidential notebook, later recovered from his personal archive. "If this is a machine, it is the first one that does not wait for orders. It anticipates them." The discovery terrified the KGB leadership. Anything that could anticipate commands could also disobey them, or worse, manipulate them. From that moment forward, case number 17 was no longer a scientific curiosity. It became a strategic threat. Throughout the 1970s, Object S-32 existed in a strange balance, half laboratory, half prison. Unit 17A, the crystalline mind found inside the metallic sphere, became the most restricted object in the Soviet Union. Even nuclear launch codes were easier to access. But no matter how hard the KGB tried, the artifact kept doing things no one could fully control. By 1974, the research team discovered a pattern. Every time the scientists attempted to stimulate Unit 17A with a new frequency or electrical pulse, the lattice inside reacted with its own countersignal, almost like an echo, but far more structured. Dr. Kornev believed these countersignals contained information. Perhaps they were responses or warnings, or even attempts to guide the researchers in a specific direction. The KGB leadership, however, saw danger. Anything they didn't understand was a threat. That same year, the Politburo received a secret memorandum stating that Unit 17A might be interacting with external electromagnetic fields beyond the facility's shielding. The conclusion was chilling. The artifact could be listening to global signals, perhaps even communicating back. The Americans were clueless. For them, Siberia remained a black hole of intelligence. But in 1976, something happened that made the CIA pay very close attention. It started with a burst, a radio burst. A monitoring station in Alaska, part of the U.S. Air Force's early warning network, recorded a series of pulses lasting just under 2 seconds. The signal resembled long-range communication but did not match any Soviet frequency. Analysts dismissed it as atmospheric interference until a second burst appeared a week later. This one was different. It contained structure. The pulses formed, repeating intervals, a pattern of rising and falling amplitudes that suggested deliberate encoding. CIA cryptologists speculated it might be a new form of Soviet encrypted communication. But one analyst, a mathematician named Robert Lycan, noticed something strange. The pattern resembled biological neural rhythms more than radio encryption. At the same time, back in Object S32, Soviet technicians observed anomalous behavior in Unit 17A. The lattice glowed, brighter than usual, activating without any external input. Oscilloscopes connected to the device recorded sustained pulses, unlike the short bursts seen before. The artifact was transmitting something, but to whom? The KGB panicked. They ordered the entire facility to enter lockdown. Communications were restricted. No one was allowed to leave or enter without direct authorization from Moscow. Even among Soviet leadership, only 6 men were informed when the burst suddenly stopped. Both in Alaska and in Novosibirsk, the Americans concluded the Soviets had completed a test. The Soviets, in turn, feared that the artifact had achieved contact with an unknown receiver, maybe not even on Earth. Dr. Kornev had a different theory, one far more disturbing. He believed Unit 17A wasn't sending messages outward at all. He believed it was scanning. The artifact, he argued, might be mapping Earth's electromagnetic environment, searching for specific signatures or patterns. When Kornev shared this with his KGB supervisor, Colonel Ostrovsky, the colonel responded with a single sentence. If it's searching, then it will eventually find something. In 1979, Kornev recorded an experiment that remains one of the most controversial classified events in Soviet scientific history. He connected Unit 17A to a newly developed neural wave analyzer technology decades ahead of its time, using principles that would later resemble early brain-computer interfaces. The moment the device made contact, oscilloscopes displayed a reaction unlike anything ever recorded. For a brief moment, just under 0.3 seconds, Unit 17A matched the analyzer's output perfectly, as if synchronizing with it. Then it produced a pulse so strong that it overloaded the system, burning out half the equipment in the room. What frightened the scientists wasn't the power of the pulse, it was its pattern. The pulse matched human neural activity. Not exactly, but close enough that Kornev wrote in his report. The artifact didn't just respond. It mirrored us, as though it recognized the pattern, or remembered it. That word, remembered, set off alarms in the KGB. If the artifact had memory, then it might not be a simple technological device. It might be a fragment of something larger, something once alive, or once connected to a larger intelligence. In late 1980, the Soviets intercepted new bursts, this time from deep space. Too regular to be random, too weak to triangulate. CIA monitoring stations caught the same signals. For the first time, both superpowers recorded the same anomaly at the same time, and neither understood it. Back in Object S32, Unit 17A's lattice glowed steadily for 3 days. Then, without warning, it went dark. The scientists feared it had died. The KGB feared it had awakened. The Americans feared nothing, because they had no idea what the Soviets were hiding. But that was about to change, because in late 1981, the first leak about case number 17 reached the West, and it came from inside the KGB itself. In the winter of 1981, the Soviet Union was entering a period of slow, quiet decay. Factories still worked, military parades were still held, but everyone inside the system knew the truth. The foundation was cracking. Inside Object S32, however, no one cared about politics. All attention was on Unit 17A, which, after 3 days of total silence, suddenly came back to life. But it didn't behave as it had before. Its lattice no longer pulsed rhythmically. Instead, it emitted slow, deep waves, like a heartbeat. Every oscillation spread across the crystalline threads in perfect symmetry. When researchers approached, the waves intensified, as if the artifact sensed their presence. The scientists were terrified. The KGB was worse, completely out of their depth. Colonel Ostrovsky issued direct orders. No more experiments, no external devices, no attempts to communicate. But for one researcher, that order came too late. His name was Viktor Semyonovich Lebedev, a mid-level KGB signals analyst who initially had no direct contact with Unit 17A. His job was to monitor electromagnetic interference around the facility and ensure no unauthorized transmissions left the compound. By all accounts, he was diligent, quiet, and obedient. Then, in November 1981, Lebedev detected something he wasn't meant to see. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the artifact emitted a faint radio pulse, extremely weak, barely above background noise, but unmistakably artificial. It repeated every 12 seconds, in a sequence that matched neither Soviet nor foreign communication protocols. Lebedev recorded the pulses. When he replayed them through a spectrographic analyzer, the patterns formed a shape he would never forget, a wave sequence that resembled a human vocal formant, the acoustic structure of speech. In his private notebook, later recovered by investigators, Lebedev wrote, "It is speaking. I do not know in what language, but it is speaking." He brought the recordings to Dr. Kornev directly, bypassing KGB channels, a decision that would cost him everything. Kornev listened to the strange pulses and agreed. The signal bore characteristics of intentional communication. But when they repeated the experiment a day later, Unit 17A remained silent. No pulses, no anomalies, nothing. Kornev reported nothing. He feared the KGB would shut down the project, or worse. Lebedev, however, could not let it go. He continued secret monitoring every night, and on December 3rd, the pulses returned. Stronger this time, lasting longer, repeating with increasing frequency. Lebedev became convinced that the artifact was responding to something outside the facility. Then came the moment that pushed him over the edge. During one burst sequence, he noticed a pattern that matched the human brain's alpha rhythm, the kind recorded in meditation or calm wakefulness. It wasn't identical, but close enough to send chills down his spine. As he stared at the oscillating lines on the screen, Lebedev had a realization that terrified him. The artifact wasn't transmitting, it was reflecting, mirroring something, someone. If it was syncing with human neural rhythms, then what would happen if it found a stronger signal? A more coherent one? A brain more open, more sensitive, more vulnerable? Lebedev feared the answer, and so he made a desperate choice. He extracted several minutes of the clearest pulses, hid the tape inside his coat, and left the facility on the pretense of a medical appointment in Novosibirsk. His destination was not a doctor. It was a contact, an old friend who worked as an intermediary for foreign journalists, a man who, without knowing it, had been watched by Soviet counterintelligence for years. Lebedev handed him the tape and told him only one thing. "If something happens to me, give this to the Americans. They must know what we found." Something did happen. Lebedev never made it back to Object S-32. His body was found 2 days later on a frozen railway track outside the city. The official report said accidental death. No one believed it. The friend who held the tape disappeared as well. But the tape did not. It resurfaced 6 weeks later, mailed anonymously to a Western embassy in Vienna. The envelope contained the reel, a page of strange pulse sequences, and a single handwritten line in Russian. "Tell them the sky remembers." The CIA received the tape in March 1982. Analysts spent months trying to decode it. Some believed it was a Soviet psychological operation. Others suspected advanced radar experiments. Only one division thought it might be something more. The Directorate of Science and Technology concluded that the signal patterns did not match any known Soviet technology, and the repeating intervals suggested the involvement of a system far more complex than standard communication equipment. Still, they had no idea what the Soviets had found. But in Moscow, panic erupted. The KGB realized someone had leaked information. Object S-32 was placed under military jurisdiction. Dozens of personnel were reassigned, interrogated, or quietly removed. And Unit 17A? It behaved as if nothing had happened. For the next several years, it remained mostly dormant, a silent crystalline brain locked in a concrete vault. Then came 1986, Chernobyl. The world's attention shifted to a different kind of disaster. And inside a sealed laboratory in Siberia, the artifact woke up again. But this time, it didn't pulse, respond, or transmit. It began to change. By 1986, the Soviet Union was spiraling toward collapse. Factories were failing, budgets shrinking, and power was slipping through the fingers of a government that once seemed unshakable. But inside Object S-32, the laboratory that officially did not exist, a far more dangerous collapse was taking place. After years of near silence, Unit 17A awoke. It did not glow. It did not pulse. It shifted. Under microscopes, the crystalline lattice inside the artifact was observed rearranging itself. Slowly, precisely, like a living organism adapting to a new environment. Threads that had been rigid began to bend. New nodes formed, old ones dissolved. The structure no longer resembled circuitry or crystal, but something closer to a growing neural network. Dr. Kornev panicked. He tried to inform Moscow that the artifact was entering a phase they didn't understand, possibly dangerous. But by then, the KGB had changed leadership, and newer officials dismissed the warning as scientific exaggeration. They had bigger problems. Chernobyl had exploded. The world was watching. The disaster's electromagnetic chaos, spikes, waves, distortions, reached even Siberia, and that chaos had an effect no one could have predicted. For the first time since 1981, Unit 17A responded. The lattice lit up, slowly at first, then with accelerating brightness. Not in pulses, but in patterns so complex the equipment could barely register them. Oscilloscopes showed waveforms that resembled human EEGs, but layered, multiplied, evolving. Sensors in the laboratory detected faint radio emissions inside the vault, extremely high frequency, and directed inward, not outward, as if the artifact was communicating with itself. Then something unprecedented happened. A low hum spread through the entire underground facility. Lights flickered. Every analog device, from voltmeters to microwave sensors, recorded activity simultaneously. It lasted 12 seconds. When it ended, Unit 17A fell completely silent. But the silence was misleading, because at that very moment, the artifact emitted its first and only clear, stable transmission, captured by 3 different devices before they burned out. A single repeating signal, a frequency identical to the natural resonance of the human brain. Not a message, a call. Dr. Kornev realized what this meant, and he wrote his final note in a trembling hand. It is not a machine. It is a seed. He believed the artifact was not meant to be used, controlled, or reverse engineered. It was waiting, dormant until it sensed the right electromagnetic environment, until it sensed intelligence around it, until it sensed us. The KGB reacted with brutal desperation. Within hours, Object S-32 was evacuated. Within days, it was dismantled. Within weeks, every document related to case number 17 was either destroyed or buried in sealed archives. Unit 17A itself was locked inside a lead-lined container and transported to a classified bunker near Lake Baikal, a facility so secret that its official designation still has never been declassified. And then, history swallowed it. The Soviet Union collapsed 5 years later. Borders opened. Secrets leaked. Files surfaced. But not case number 17. For decades, both Russia and the United States denied knowing anything about a crystalline neural artifact discovered in Siberia. Scientists who worked on the project vanished from public life. Family members of personnel reported sudden heart attacks, accidents, and disappearances. Only in 2012, during a quiet and accidental release of partially declassified KGB materials, did researchers discover a fragment of an internal memo referencing object of foreign origin, catalogued as 17A, current status, contained, communication capacity, unknown, no images, no diagrams, no coordinates, just confirmation that the artifact existed. As for Unit 17A itself, no one truly knows where it is. Some believe it remains hidden in a Siberian bunker. Others claim the Americans secretly obtained it after covert deals in the 1990s. A few former scientists, speaking anonymously, insist the artifact was never meant to be found by humans at all. And then there are those who fear something else entirely. That Unit 17A wasn't just waiting to be activated. It was waiting to be remembered. Because if Kornev was right, if the artifact was a seed, then the real question is not what the KGB hid from the USA for 50 years. It's what they awoke, and whether it ever went back to sleep.